Good day to our viewers. In this video, we will talk about our thesis paper, which is entitled ET-based irrigation system with automated bird deterrent system. The authors of this paper are Sive Janle B. Galela, Rigil D. Olegario, Carl Francis John M. Reyes, yours truly, and Dr. Jennifer C. De La Cruz and engineer Alejandro H. Ballado Jr. For the introduction, nowadays, urban farming is becoming a trend here in the Philippines. With that taken in mind, what do we mean by urban farming? So, urban farming is like whenever you're planting or consider farming while you're in your house in a city. It can be in your household area or maybe just inside your house. So, based on a number of researches, people tend to waste a huge amount of clean water in irrigation when it comes to farming. So, let's talk about what type of plant did we use or consider in this research. So, siling labuyo is a common spice in the Philippines. It is in the family of peppers, and it is commonly used to add spice or spiciness in your food. And apparently, birds are one of the few who can prey among them. So, knowing that living or having farming in a city where birds are common, there's no doubt that there is a possibility that birds will prey on your plants. So, considering that we want this research to be cost effective and as much as possible open for everyone, we consider making use of a Raspberry Pi, which can easily automate the process that our research will demand on. So let's move on. Here are the objectives of our research. First is to implement an ET-based irrigation system using a Raspberry Pi, specifically the Model 3B Plus, deployed with sensors such as the HD22 and the anemometer. Next is to determine the amount of water that can be saved using the proposed system. Third is to determine the statistical significance of the average number of fruit per plant that can be produced using both the traditional and proposed approach. And number 4 and final, to implement an automated bird deterrent system integrated with the said automated irrigation system. So here's the conceptual framework of our paper. As you can see, the input will be the sensors, the DHT22 and the anemometer. The DHT22 for the temperature and humidity, while the anemometer for the wind speed. So the process is that the Raspberry Pi will compute for the amount of water to be irrigated, while the output is to turn on the water pump for a certain period of time and tabulate the data that reflects on the application. So this is the conceptual framework for the irrigation system. At the same time, to ensure that the data that we collected throughout the study is accurate, we considered to calibrate our sensors. So the anemometer calibration was done in Pag-asa, which is the government facility here in the Philippines that is in charge for that. And the sensor was placed in a wind tunnel, and the output voltage was measured. At the same time, EDM106A, which is a commercially available device that can effectively measure temperature and humidity, was used to calibrate our DHT22 sensor. So here's a picture of our sensors, the anemometer and the DHT22. Let's move on to the evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is the basis of this project when it comes to calculating the amount of irrigation that should be placed within the plants. So here's the equation that we've derived from a lot of researches finished and done already. So as you can see, the amount of reference evapotranspiration, which is millimeters per day, can be calculated in terms of the temperature, the humidity, the wind speed, and the extraterrestrial irrigation, which is approximated based on the location of the farm or the area where we plant our siling labuyo plants. Here's a picture of our final prototype. And for the testing of the irrigation system, by the way, we're first we're first talking about the irrigation system, then we'll follow through to the bird deterrent system after this irrigation system. So the factors to test the effectiveness of irrigation system are the amount of water use, and to be significant, the average number of fruits per plant. So here's our data for the first 3 weeks, and it simply shows the amount of water irrigated to the plants by the system, by the automated system. Yeah, and here are the data for 4, 5, and 6, week 4, 5, and 6. So here we can see the irrigation system testing and the pictures of our plants starting week 1. Here are them in week 1. So the red being the evapotranspiration base, while the green one is the traditional irrigation. And next, here are the pictures of our plants at week 6. So yeah, they grew a lot. So here's the table. As you can see, we considered a 6-week testing, for it is the amount of time where the plants will expectedly be bearing fruit, which will be significant for our study. So as you can see, the EP-based system consumed a total of 9,268 milliliters of water, while the traditional system consumed 25,200 milliliters of water. So we can see here that the EP-based system consumed less water than the traditional system. By the way, the traditional system was based on a study where they watered the plant based on a real farmer, which considered this amount of water in watering siling labuyo plants. So here's the next. This is the table that shows the average number of fruit per plant. So for the EP-based system, the average fruit per plant was 4.33, while for the traditional, it's 3.67. So here we can see that despite having less water, the plants still bear more fruit than compared to the traditional system. So this simply means that the water fed to the plants was not that significant. So let's move on. So here's the graphical user interface of our application, which shows the real-time data of the system and also the previous data. So let's move on to the bird deterrent system. So here's the conceptual framework of our bird deterrent system. The main input is the camera, while the process is the image processing, which is done with the HAR Cascade classifier and the Raspberry Pi, of course. And for the output, the bird deterrent system will be turned on and a notification will be reflected on the graphical user interface. So let's move on. For the testing of our bird deterrent system, first is the bird detection. So we place a camera to a bird which is placed on a cage. Then we move the camera away from the cage and see if the camera can still detect the bird. So here's the data that we've gathered. As we can see, the camera stopped recognizing the bird at 38 inches. So from here we concluded that the maximum distance of the camera to detect the bird is 3 feet, which is 36 inches. For the bird detection accuracy, we considered making or adding obstructions for the camera to have into its frame at the distance of 36, which is the maximum distance. So here we added three types of obstruction. First is we added 3 more plants. Then we added more plants, plenty more plants. And the last and final is to add plants and at the same time people's body parts, our body parts. So from this test, we've gathered data that the system can still detect the bird. So for the bird deterrence, we tested it here, which is the cage of the birds. By the way, this is a big cage for the birds. Then we placed a revolving red light underneath. So in the first picture, we can see that the birds are near the red light and they're like compiled to each other. Then once we turned on the red light, red revolving light, so you can see that the birds flew into different directions, and it can be clearly seen that they are disturbed with this revolving red light. At the same time, we also considered to have our blinking red light only to make sure whether the red light will be the deterring factor or the mechanical movement of the light will be the deterring factor. So here we can see that the birds didn't even move even when the red light started blinking. So yeah, for the bird deterrent system testing, we can see that if the action of the red light is rotating, then the birds were deterred. While if it's just blinking, it wasn't that effective. So for the statistical analysis, we made use of independent t-tests. So the independent samples t-test compares the means of 2 independent groups in order to determine whether there is statistical evidence that the associated population means are significantly different. So our significance level that we use is 0.05, and the p-value computed was less than 0.05. So here we can say that the significant difference in the amount of water is significant and it means something. While at the same time, for the fruit quantity, we made use of the same significance level, which is 0.05, and the calculated p-value is greater than 0.05, which simply means that there's no significant difference in the fruit quantity. So for the conclusion of our research, we are proud to say that we successfully developed an ET-based irrigation system composed of a Raspberry Pi and the sensors, the camera. At the same time, we are able to fulfill the objectives of this research. We calculated the amount of water saved, which was 15,931, which is proven to be significant. Then the data are accessible through the mobile application, like you can open it whenever you want for as long as you have the internet connection. Next is the difference on the number of fruits produced is not that significant, while the difference on the water saved was significant. So next is we successfully implemented the bird deterrent system and integrated it to the irrigation system. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your time. Have a nice day.